You're listening to the Rosenfeld Review. I'm Lou Rosenfeld, and I am very excited to have my friend, colleague, a Rosenfeld media author, a man about user experience, Christian Crumlish. Hi, Christian.
Hey, Lou. It's great to be here again.
Great to be here. You were just here not long ago. We were interviewing you about your new book. I think it's your third book or your fourth book, but it's your first Rosenfeld media book. Product Management for UX People, From Designing to Thriving in a Product World, which is an interesting book. We're not going to talk too much about it today because, again, we've already had a podcast on that, but we are going to get into that intersection because the intersections, in this case, between product and UX are I think, where the really interesting things are happening, the best conversations. And you were just telling me about a conversation you were just having, what was it, this morning?
Yesterday morning, yes.
Close enough. So this was at Mind the Product?
That's right.
So what was going on?
So they're having one of their hybrid events. I didn't have to go to London to host this conversation, but they reached out a couple months ago, I'm sure, behind the book, asking if I might moderate a conversation about the relationship between product and UX. And that's a format that they play with, where it's almost call-in show type. You know, it's a video Zoom-like thing where people can come on and ask their question or just type it in the chat. And what's interesting to me is that I've been at a lot of events. I've been presenting, teaching workshops, still largely to UX people, as the book, kind of is aimed at UX people trying to make sense of product. And yet Mind the Product is a little bit of a mirror image community that's product people who are certainly attentive to UX, but much more rooted in their own product backgrounds. And this was an opportunity to ask them about really this area of overlap and tension and at times like sharp elbows or unspoken assumptions that a lot of people are addressing these days as they do UX work on product teams or as they are product managers trying to figure out the best way to collaborate, with their UX colleagues. And I was pleased to see that there's a sense of having struck a nerve, with this topic that I find the book is sort of helping to bring it to a sharper focus, I think, being out there as a talking point. But what you get when you raise this subject is a wide range of responses, everything from, I don't know what people are talking about, I love my team, we all get along great, to some fairly frank negative comments about colleagues that you get from people saying, I don't like my product manager, or I don't like my UX designer. They don't listen to the research, or they want to slow things down, or you get these critiques. And the most interesting thing to me is that it feels like the beginning of a long overdue conversation, where people are finally saying the uncomfortable things out loud that you have to actually get to the point where you're actually talking to each other, even about unpleasant things, or there's no way to really sort them out, and I think a lot of us have been sort of bumping into each other with unspoken assumptions that haven't come to the surface yet. So I just see this sort of pent up energy and this desire to have the conversation, which is pleasing to me, because the idea of a book like mine is not to say, here's the template, here's the answer, just do this, this, and this, and your team will thrive, but more to lay out the idea that there's a lot of work still to be done in figuring out how we work together, and that there's no shame in not having it figured out yet, and that you're not alone in that situation.
So, about this fraught sense, I don't know if this lines up with your experience, but and certainly you have a lot more than I do, but the sense I get from UX people, both designers and researchers, is that, here we've sort of gotten established, we kind of sort of have a seat at the table, we think we're in a good position, and then we run into the whole product side of our organizations. And ultimately, those are the people who make the call on what gets shipped. They're the people who control the P&L. They're the people who basically trump a lot of what UX people are hoping to do. And there's a lot of overlap. And, we have the advent of things like product designers, and it gets murky, and it seems murky in a mostly negative way. And I'm wondering if that's what you're seeing and if there's a way through this.
Well, I definitely see those things. And what's interesting is having been on both sides and having consulted with companies and teams trying to figure out how to work together, it's also clear to me that um, people approaching this from one side of the divide or the other see it differently. We'll describe the same exact conflicts in different terms, and that there's often a lack of empathy, ironically, in putting oneself in the other person's shoes, or even doing the homework to figure out why do they say no, or why do they take a position that I find problematic or challenging. Product people, the scenario might be that user research shows that the problem being worked on isn't really the right problem, or that the solution that we're trying to ship is actually not going to solve the problem. And it's human nature for maybe the product person at that point to be sad to hear that, that uh-oh, and maybe to be in denial and say, I don't agree, and push back. So now, if you did all the research and you're trying to save the project, and you just get a gatekeeper telling you we're going to plow ahead anyway, that's very, very frustrating. And so the inability to persuade or to make the case or to put things in terms that the other person values, the counterpart, cause a lot of these problems, I think. Now, I mean, it also ranges from really dysfunctional teams with unclear leadership, or say a brand of product management, which is really just ticket taking from the bosses. It's a kind of it appears to be a boss, but it's really more like an overseer, like a person cracking the whip or making people row faster. That person often doesn't feel like they have a lot of agency either. They're just taking assignments from on high and passing them along. But they can certainly feel very oppressive to a UX person working in that environment. In other contexts, UX people feel like the product person is a gatekeeper. And yet if you talk to the product manager, they'd say, I can't make anything happen. I just have to persuade people. I just need to make the case. And yet there still appear to be sort of a, between what the UX person wants and what's actually happening. I absolutely think there's ways to get these problems addressed. I think that gatekeeper frustration, the UX person should eventually be able to look at their product manager as an ally, as another person on the team who's deeply concerned with the value of the experience being designed for the customer, whether the paying customer or the target user, whatever you want to call that person. There's an incredible amount of shared goals, and you succeed or fail together, honestly. And so the dysfunction isn't helping anybody. But it does involve, to get through it, people have to be vulnerable. You have to have situations where you can talk about difficult things, admit that you might not know it all, that the other person might be bringing something to the table that's valuable and has to be reckoned with. And you have to learn how to negotiate.
Well, it seems like one of those areas that's perfect for some sort of people skills boot camp. But it is more than that, really, right? Aren't there very concrete areas where they may be wrestled over right now, but actually they're great opportunities for product and UX people to collaborate more effectively?
Yeah, I think product discovery, as product people like to call it, or just general user research, is a great example of a realm of huge potential. If you get alignment there, if you can kind of pull together on what are our research questions, what are we trying to understand, what's the best research modality. If a product person can allow the expertise of the UX researcher, to help support the goals, and if the UX researcher can allow that the product person has strategic responsibility and access to a larger sort of business context, and they can figure out a way to sort of drop some of the assumptions they have about each other's methods, then you can very powerfully kind of put together a research agenda and figure out what needs to be de-risked and what you can sort of just go ahead and test in the wild and things like that. However, today, that's one of the greatest areas of complaint and frustration. And I've found that, say, when I teach workshops to UX people on how to, function better in a product environment, nearly half of the people who come are researchers, and often researchers in leadership roles, who are starting to think about product management as being the reins they have to grip to actually get in charge of discovery and stuff like that. But it just tells me that there's some unfinished business there in making the case to each other that we're really doing something that's part and parcel of the same thing, and we should not be at odds with each other.
So now, you out there who is listening, we think this is probably an area that's of concern for certainly many of you listeners. And Christian and I have a kind of a special announcement to make that might speak to you. A new conference is coming around the corner, around the bend, December 6th and 7th. It's actually a one-day conference on the 6th with workshops on the 7th. It's called Design in Product, and it is curated by one Christian Crumlish and produced by Rosenfeld Media. So that's our big news. And Christian, I'm so excited because you just, in a very short amount of time before the break, ran through the guts of a whole bunch of conflicts and frustrations, but a lot of opportunities and things to be optimistic about. And that's what we're trying to do with this program, which is still coming together. And I know it's not much time. I'll talk about how we're going to deal with that later. But tell us about the program. What's your vision for what UX people and maybe product people who attend as well are going to get out of this?
Sure, and I think if I have the branding correct, it will be part of the Rosenfeld Futures.
That's right,
series.
The first one.
Yeah, and I like that framing because it's certainly you've got some well-established conferences. I've talked to people out, by the way, in my travels, and a lot of folks are looking at the way Rosenfeld is managing hybrid conferences, the cohort ideas that you've shared. There's other people paying close attention to that. You should know you're a trailblazer in this area as well. And so those topics of things like design at scale, et cetera, have been around for a long time. They're quite mature. The conferences themselves have evolved, from originally the completely in person, and then pandemic, and then hybrid, and so there's this lots of learning from that. I feel like this Rosenfeld Futures kind of model that we've been talking about, that you sort of shared with me, is a way of trying to catch things that are emerging and becoming more salient, but don't necessarily have the long and deep footprint of some of these other topics, and that therefore we want to kind of catch them on the volley and try to do. You can talk more about the process. I know that that's something you want to get into, but sort of catch things while they're ripe. There's this sense, as I said, that this conversation is overdue, and to provide an opportunity to crystallize it or bring it out into the public sphere, and have us, like product and UX people, talk to each other honestly about how do we view each other, and how is it working, and what could we do better. There's no time like the present for that. So absolutely, I'd love to see both product and UX people attend. Certainly, we reach UX people more easily, and that's our home ground. But we're looking for we've got speakers lined up who come from both backgrounds and who are quite intelligent about these areas of overlap and conflict. I think we're going to be able to address both things more kind of at the craft and how you do it level, and also things sort of more at the strategic. What is product sense, and what does that actually mean to a UX person, and how do you lead in a product environment, no matter what your kind of fundamental training is in. We're not going to pull punches. I mean, I think some of our presenters will talk about where there's problems and gaps, where UX people are maybe doing themselves a disservice. I think it's comfortable to say we have the answers, as other people have the wrong model, and we just need to teach them about UX, and then things will go back to the way they were supposed to be. It's a little bit more wise to say, hey, maybe we don't know it all, and maybe we could be doing a better job in this environment of making the case for what we do, and making our services more salient to the people we want to work with. I think we also, it's a one-day conference, it's remote. We're very conscious of the idea that carving out a day and then, say, being in front of a screen is itself a tricky sort of environment to stay attentive to. So the last thing we want to do is just have a wall of people talking to you all day long in a lecturing environment. We're, I think, trying to come up with some very interesting different formats, interactive formats, variety in the way the material is presented, so that it should keep folks interested and be snackable and have room for reflection. It's a challenge. We're setting ourselves a big challenge, I think, to try to pack a lot into one day without tiring everybody out. But it's an interesting challenge. And I think the combination of maybe having some things already pre-recorded video, and then having sort of the live, orchestration of the event, is one way to do that, to preserve the sort of the feeling of an in-person event without accepting the fact that we're doing this in a hybrid environment or a remote environment.
So, in terms of some of like those meat and potatoes challenges that UX people can help product people grapple with, what's some of the examples of that that we have presentations on?
Sure. So the thing that comes up quite often that I know we're going to have at least one person speak to directly is it's often framed, at least from the UX side, is how can research influence the product strategy or the roadmap? It's often comes across as a pain point or complaint. I do all this research. I have all these findings. I produced a deck. I presented it, and then nothing changed. The roadmap didn't shift. Nothing was changed in the planning. So we're definitely going to have some, like I said, at least one person speaking to that in practical terms about how do you actually communicate and present your findings, and how do you understand how things are received in a way so that you don't set yourself up for failure there. I think we'll also be looking at some of the specific product management responsibilities that have not traditionally been part of what a UX designer or researcher or strategist had to consider. The numbers, the data, the money, things like that. I think certainly I feel like I came up when I had UX or UX related titles. I didn't touch the money. I was not responsible for growth or other metrics, and I wasn't often informed about, say, the impact of my designs on those goals and those metrics. And maybe ignorance was bliss, and it helped me be pure and things like that. But I've come to realize that if you're building digital software products and trying to ship them into a market, that success and failure are measured in these numbers, and the budget and the revenue goals and things like that are major aspects of whether or not your design succeeds. That they're actually, on some meaningful sense, some of the materials you're working with, the digital sort of substance that you're designing with, and to remain kind of pure and ignorant of some of these hard data-driven facts doesn't help you do your best work, and that there's room not necessarily to turn into a bean counter or become a product manager full time, but to be sensitive to the fact that that's a really important consideration, and to have intelligent conversations with your product counterparts so that you can make a strong case for, well, no, this is a time when the user's needs matter more, and it's affordable to do this against our other priorities. It just there's some room there to learn the vocabulary and the concerns of product in order to do UX more effectively.
Well, I think it's such an important point that product people have all kinds of responsibilities and challenges that are not normally associated with what UX people have to tackle. It's not a perfect overlap. There's an intersection, but it's not 100%. And I would love for this event to, in a small way, lead to product people saying, well, we need to UXify those things.
That's right.
Things that UX people don't normally get involved with. And by doing so, are really going to help cement the value of UX for product people, and also help UX people understand the challenges that product people have to face. So I'm really excited by this, if it's not obvious already. So, one of the things that we are trying to do a little differently, and Christian, you mentioned we're calling it like the futures format. If you know anything about our conferences, they are major productions. And by that, I mean not just like what you see on stage, but what goes on like in the 6 months before the thing happens. So we pay teams of curators to keep a conversation going in a usually Slack-based community with monthly meetings and presentations all year long. And we see the conference as a polished snapshot of that conversation that's going on in the community. And then our curators do usually 2 or 3 months of research and CFP, a call for proposals design, instrument design, and reviewing sometimes close to a couple hundred submissions to speak. And, it's a huge undertaking, and it's an expensive undertaking. Now, with topics like this that are more timely, where there's points of pivot or things that are just new and need to be explored. It's really hard to do that 6 months of work and have a community in place already where to have that conversation about what ends up being a conference program. And so in this case, we're doing an experiment. And Christian, I'm really grateful that you're willing to try this with us, where instead of spending the months and months doing the program design and having a extensive call for proposals and so forth, we're doing a very abbreviated version of that where we're working with an expert, you, who is also someone who not only shares a lot of the same values, but has extensive contacts in the industry, and working to identify speakers through our shared networks, but also to ask around and asking a lot of people in the field who are voices that they recommend that we know about, that should be surfaced, that represent underrepresented communities. And it's a different way to skin the cat than what we would normally do with more open research, extensive research, and going through a CFP process. But we think we can have a similar outcome in terms of quality and diversity. Then we go into a kind of more normal process that we use with our conferences, where there's a couple months of speaker preparation, and they do that in cohorts. That's maybe going to be a little abbreviated in this case, but we're going to have those speakers working together, hearing from each other, understanding each other's ideas, helping critique each other in an iterative way so that ultimately the program is really well integrated and cohesive and has a clear narrative arc. So
yeah, I think there's a goal to see whether we can kind of produce the same results or comparable results that you've managed with what we've learned within this case, a somewhat telescoped or truncated version of the process. I'll confess it's somewhat intimidating, particularly making sure that we have sufficient outreach, that we're including, diverse voices and listening to people from, outside of, say, my immediate network, your immediate network. That's something that we definitely will be welcoming and looking for that input, just because that's one of the things that the benefit of the longer process has certainly proven, and we don't want to lose that in this version of what we're doing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what keeps me up at night too, to some degree, and that's it's just something it really is an experiment. I mean, it's funny. I sometimes I talk with people and they're like, "Oh, conferences. It's those must be pretty easy to put on, and it's a great business to be in." It is a great business to be in, but it's a really hard thing, and it can be a very expensive thing. And I got to tell you, it's been obviously a challenging business to be in during the pandemic and its aftermath. I'm not sure we're quite at aftermath yet. You know what I mean? It's not been easy.
Sure.
And so we have to be constantly trying new things, both topics as well as approaches. So I'm just glad we have the people and the support to do that. But one of the things that we try to be with all of our products is very open and transparent, whether it's books and conferences as well. And Christian, I think it's safe to say that you and I are both very open to hearing not only ideas for topics and ideas for potential speakers for this conference, but just questions in general that we can answer as best we can, or learn from people who want to weigh in about this whole concept of design and product. So I'm reachable at, you can DM me on Twitter at Louis Rosenfeld. I can be reached on LinkedIn through DMs, and good Lord, if you want to email me, I'll even put my email address out there. It's Lou, L-O-U, at rosenfeldmedia.com. I just threw down the gauntlet, Christian. You going to pick it up and do the same?
Sure. Yeah, people can DM. I also make sure my DMs are open on Twitter. But you can reach me there. I'm Media Junkie on a lot of services like Twitter, and even my shorthand on LinkedIn is under Media Junkie. If you, I have an email address that's already out there. I'm willing to say it on the air. It's XIAN, which is an abbreviation for my first name, Christian, at pobox.com. So exian@pobox.com. If you want to just send me your thoughts or your questions. As you said, Lou, I feel like this event is another punctuation in this larger conversation. It was sort of a moment, and the prep for it, the discussing it right now on the podcast, planning it, having the event, and then the aftermath, for me are all ways to sort of fuel that conversation and stimulate it and drive it forward. So yeah, it doesn't have to wait for December 6th to start. You don't have to. You can start talking to us right now, and we want to hear it, and we'll field as much of that as we can in the event and in an ongoing way.
Yeah, I mean, you may be listening to this podcast long after the conference wraps. Still love to hear from you. So I'll bottom line it, and then one more thing we need to cover, which is a little gift for our listeners. But I'll bottom line it here. New conference, 1-day event, plus a day of workshops. It's called Design and Product. It's taking place December 6th. Workshop days, December 7th. Christian Crumlish is our curator. Rosenfeld Media is the producer. I've been greatly aided by our director of events and communities, Kat Meyer, has taken a real big role and is really, it's been really great to see her creativity poured into this event design. What's the event about? Well, it's an exploration of the intersection of UX and product, specifically looking at how UX people can flip the script, and rather than having a contentious, fractious relationship with product, people can look at ways that we can actually help them through better UXification, if that's the way we want to look at it, and understand them better, and there's just so many opportunities for collaboration. That's what we're going to explore. December 6th and 7th, Design in Product, the very first Rosenfeld Futures Conference. I'm excited to be working with you on this, Christian.
Yeah, thanks for asking me to do this with you.
So what's your gift for the Rosenfeld Review listeners today?
So my gift in this case is to just sort of talk briefly about a person who I met recently. I was at EuroIA for the first time. A longstanding goal of mine was to go to EuroIA and speak there. And as some folks may or may not know, I've been working for the California State Office of Data and Innovation recently. So taking product management to a government context, and also merging product management and service design and service innovation, which government sort of forces you to think in terms of. That's an area of interest for me right now. And when I was at EuroIA, I had the privilege of seeing somebody speak, a person named Katie Arnold, who until very recently was the head of UX for the Home Office in UK.gov. And for people who follow GovTech or Civic Tech, UK.gov is a trailblazer, set a lot of standards. Also made a lot of mistakes in public, which they're open about. And Katie told me some interesting things about how the first wave of playbooks have become a little bit ossified and turned into sort of rule books that can't be changed, and the agility is gone. And it's a lesson in winning the revolution and then becoming the new tyrant, in the next generation afterward. But she gave a really interesting talk about humility in some ways, about UX people sometimes seeing ourselves as heroes, superheroes, and realizing that the savior complex puts people off, and that if you come in the door asking questions rather than announcing your greatness and all the help you're going to deliver, that you'll get much better results. And I just felt like she told a really interesting story in her talk. She's finished with her stint at UK.gov and starting to do new things. So I don't have a website or project to point you to, but I'd say she's a person to follow on LinkedIn, Katie Arnold. If you just type in Katie Arnold Home Office, you'll find the right person. And really just a wonderful person, great talk, and somebody who I definitely plan to keep my eye on in the future.
Well, I'm certainly glad to hear of her, and that the UK Digital Service is really amazing in terms of not just what it's taught us, but it's sent its alumni to other countries.
That's right.
Repeatedly who've spread the good word. And I agree with you. They're not superheroes, but I think those people are heroes nonetheless. So
yeah, absolutely. It's more just how you talk about yourself. You can still secretly believe that you're a hero.
There you go. Oh, Christian, well, you're one of my heroes. And I'm sorry, but we have to
Oh,
end our podcast. Anyway, Christian and I are looking forward to hearing from you and maybe seeing you at Design and Product December 6th and 7th. Mark your calendars. It's virtual. It's going to be great. You don't want to miss it. Christian,
can't wait.
great to talk with you today.
All right, take care.